Yep. Yeah, well, yeah, I thought we'd stand here just because I had those over there. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us, and I'm glad to see so many members of the General Assembly that are here, as well as others that are interested in this announcement today. I'm delighted to be joined by the President of the Senate, President Pro Tem, Jim Hendren, Senator Jim Hendren, as well as the Speaker of the House, Matthew Shepard, and then we have the Chairman of the Revenue and Tax in both the House and the Senate, Representative Joe Jett, and Senator Jonathan Dismay. Also see Director Larry Walther here, that Department of Finance has been very instrumental in helping us as we work through this. Today, we are announcing the introduction of a new tax bill called the 5.9 Plan, because it reduces our tax rate in Arkansas to 5.9% over the next 2 years. The first year, it will go to 6.6%, which will go into effect January 1 of 2020. In the second year, it will go down to 5.9% on January 1 of 2021. As you remember, I campaigned on lowering the tax rate to 5.9% over 4 years, and the estimated cost was $192 million. Because of the incredible work of the Legislative Task Force, their guidance on this, the fact that we've been working on this with the legislative leadership over the past weeks and longer, we have come up with the 5.9 plan that works better for the budget, allows us to get to the 5.9% in 2 years instead of 4 years. And I want to compliment the Legislative Task Force for the work that they did. I did want to draw attention to this map that illustrates and shows the tax rates for the various states. Of course, the darker the green, the higher the tax rate, and Arkansas is a darker green than our surrounding states, because our current rate of 6.9% is higher than our surrounding states that we're having to compete with to bring industry, capital into this state, and to keep talent into this state. And we even are competing over on the East Coast, of course, and this allows us to be competitive when we lower it to 5.9%. And so it shows the progress that we'll be making from a national perspective and a competitive perspective whenever we lower this rate to 5.9%. This plan costs $97 million whenever it is fully phased in, and that will be phased in over 2 years. And the reason it's not $192 million is that on the upper bracket that we reduce the benefit to the higher income earners. The rate goes down, but some of the incremental brackets are not reduced, and so that saved us on cost. It gets us to 5.9% quicker, and it achieves the goal of flattening that rate. This $97 million cost, of course, will be phased in over 2 years. In the first year of the biennium, it is about a $25 million cost to the budget. I also wanted to go back a little bit further in history, if I might, and put this in perspective of our entire efforts on lowering taxes in Arkansas. And as you know, this is not a standalone tax bill. This is the third phase of a 3-part program to get competitive tax rates in Arkansas. And on the far right, you will see the income tax cuts that started out in 2015. In 2015, we lowered $102 million actually in taxes for the middle income category. And then 2 years later, that was followed by a $50 million income tax cut for the lower income category. That's $150 million in cuts to lower and middle income categories, and you put that in perspective with this $97 million cut. in the third part of it to flatten the rate. The reason this, if you see on the last green line, the tall one, it's for the year 2019. And the $50 million income tax cut goes into effect January 1 of 2019. In addition, you have $61 million in cuts for the final phase of the grocery tax cut. So we have, before we start, $111 million in income tax cuts, most of those going to the lower income categories. And so this, what we're doing today in the 5.9 plan, gives us the final phase of the three-part program to lower taxes in Arkansas. And already we've provided tax relief for 90% of Arkansans, and this will complete the work for this first initial work on tax reform here in the state of Arkansas. How does this impact our budget that has been presented? Well, in FY20, this will cost us $25.6 million for the first phase in lowering the income tax rate. This is in line with our existing budget and our reserve funds that were set aside for tax cuts and other needs of our state. In the second year of the biennium, we absorbed the cost of $25.6 million in that year, and that year we still will have a surplus of $11.2 million. And so you can see that this is consistent with the budget that has been presented. It is absorbable by our growth and the existing budget that we have presented. And so that is the 5.9 plan that we will be presenting to the legislature. I'm very grateful for our leadership, but also the chairman of both committees that will be carrying this legislation and putting their names on it and be presenting it to the General Assembly. With that, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Governor. I just would like to echo the Governor's comments. I think this is an exciting opportunity for the state of Arkansas. I'd like to thank on the House end Representative Jett, Chairman Jett, for working on this, along with Chairman Lane Jean, the co-chairman of the Tax Task Force. I think that to kind of go back over a few things the Governor's touched on, I think dropping the top rate is very important from a competitiveness, being competitive regionally. I think that's an important point. And also, as we think about it in terms of this being the next phase in overall tax reduction, I've been here for 8 years and have been a part of numerous other cuts in the past, and I think this is kind of the logical next step. And then also, I clearly understand as Speaker, there are a lot of different ideas, competing interests in terms of how do we put this together. But I really appreciate the Governor's efforts to work with the legislature and Senator Hendren and Senator Dismang for their efforts in working with the House. And I think that what we have here is a very manageable and measured tax cut that is going to provide significant relief and overall make Arkansas more competitive. And so with that, again, thank you, Governor, for your leadership.
Let me just add, I want to thank especially Co-Chairman Jean of the Tax Reform Task Force and the other members that served for over a year and a half. That was a long journey, and what you see here today is in large part due to their efforts. As you know, we created that task force simultaneously with passing the $50 million tax cut on low income. And those of you that were here in 2017, remember there was a lot of debate in that session. Do we, after the middle income earners were given relief, do we move to the high income earners, or do we do something for low income people? And one of the things the math showed us real quick is that reducing that top rate is very expensive, and it better be done thoughtfully, and there better be some planning put into that to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a budget distress. So we went with a bill which reduced the taxes on low income and a tax reform task force which studied the issue for over a year and a half. And what you see here today is the first bill, and really the most important bill, of a process that will result in several other bills reforming our tax code and making us more competitive. There were two things that I set out, and I think all of us on the task force agreed upon, we had to look very carefully upon. One was, don't get ourselves in budget distress. We had legislators from Oklahoma and Kansas come and tell us about the perils of not putting thought into how you do tax relief. And the other was, make ourselves not stand out on that map as one of the highest income tax rates in the South. And what we have here today accomplishes both those. As you heard, it's almost half the price of what the original plans to drop the top rate we came out with. But after continued work and continued cooperation with the House, they really brought some great ideas to the table with the executive branch, with DF&A. We continued to work to find a way to make sure that nobody got a tax increase, which is absolutely certain in this bill, and that we reduce that top rate so that we can be competitive with other states. So I think it's good when we see the process work, and this has been the process that has taken a long time, but I think it's going to yield good fruit.
With that, we're happy to take any questions.
Is there, there's going to be some skepticism about the cost, the 97 million figure. How confident are you guys in the estimate? And are there other estimates that people disagree significantly with that cost?
Well, everyone can address that, but if you look what we've done over the past 4 years, whenever we had our $100 million income tax cut for the middle income, Department of Finance gave us very good numbers for that. We relied upon those, and we've absorbed that. The same thing for the $50 million tax cut. And so these numbers have been developed by the Department of Finance. We're confident in those numbers, and they're consistent with what we've done in the past.
Governor, at what point did you decide, let's throw out the earlier plan to the other pension, to 2459 plan and say, let's go with this particular plan?
What led us to that point?
Yes,
Meeting with these gentlemen. No, that's part of the legislative process, and part of it, you want to get there quicker than 4 years. That was one of the messages from the Legislative Task Force, because they have other priorities and they have other issues to deal with. And so it was just a compromise that was reached that made sense. And I've always said my objective is to get to 5.9. This gets us there. It gets us there quicker, so I'm happy. And whenever you look at the cost impact, we give up a little bit on simplification on that top bracket, but we can come back to that simplification in future years, and it does give us some room to work there.
Do you have any details of that simplification process in that upper bracket?
I tell you, I've got Department of Finance team here and our budget director and Paul Gehring that can go through that probably in a better fashion than I can. But if you have, the key difference was that on the higher income categories, you really reduce it from 192 million down to 97 million because you did not have the incremental breaks that were adjusted. And so it gives them the relief on the top end by having it at 5.9%, but some of the incremental relief and changes were not made.
So we still have 3 tax tables?
Yes.
And then will this require a 3/4 vote?
I'm going to let.
Yeah, the question was, does it require a 3/4 vote? And it does, because we are changing the brackets, and that's what would require that to happen.
Can somebody provide the math on this? How many people would pay higher rates? How you get to the number? I mean, if people are paying higher rates, that's going to generate X amount of dollars more in tax revenue, and how that counteracts to the 97 million.
Yeah, so the,
I
yeah.
asked these questions about the other plan, and I never got any.
So the lower income tax table is not being adjusted in any way. There is one minor adjustment to the middle income tax table, and that's to lower what is at 6% now to 5.9%. And then you have the upper bracket, or upper table, which kicks in at $80,501. In that table, the way it works is the first $2,000 is taxed at 2%. The next $4,000 is taxed at 4%, and then everything above that, so $8,000 and above, is taxed at 5.9%. So that's a higher marginal tax rate than what was currently in that higher table.
So how many taxpayers would be hit with that higher rate, and how much would that raise to get to the 96?
So kind of the question is, and there are bracket adjustments. So obviously there would be a cliff because there's multiple tables, and so there are credits that are allowed to ensure that anyone that picks up that income after $80,501 would not have a tax increase. Actually, the cliff wouldn't exist. So essentially $1 wouldn't cost you $500 in taxes. So there are bracket adjustments throughout in that range that helps smooth that out.
Can I just add one thing to that, because I think we're getting a little bit.
I mean, this is like basic math. Is it 200,000, 300,000?
We didn't look at it as far as the numbers. What we looked at as far as the math with dollars. But the point that Senator Dismang was making, and I think we're kind of confusing this with the previous effort, where there was a significant number of taxpayers who were seeing a rate increase and potentially even a dollar increase, because nobody below 80,000 table got changed except for that one change that he mentioned in the middle table. The upper income table is the one that is simplified to 2, 4, 5.9. And so again, when you go above $8,000, you're at 5.9, but you're also realizing the benefit of that rate reduction. So it's still a net dollar reduction. So one of the premises, as I said earlier, when we started out on tax plans, was there was not net tax increases. There may be rate increases, but there will not be net tax increases dollars-wise for anybody, and that's what this plan accomplishes.
Andrew.
With three-fourths, and this may be a question for legislative leaders too, but how confident are you that you can get three-fourths on that, and how quickly you all want to? I guess what's the timeline on trying to get this through?
Well, I think Senator Dismang is going to file the bill today, and I think you'll see it heard in committee next week. We already have met with, on our end, and the speaker can speak for his end, but we've met with both caucuses. All members have been given a copy of the bill. I'm confident that, and again, the bill's only 4 or 5 pages. It's really much simpler than some of the other efforts that we looked at. So I think you'll see it move through the Senate next week.
I think from a House perspective, clearly going for the supermajority is always more challenging than if we were looking at a proposal with just a simple majority. But I think what gives us the opportunity to be successful here is, as I mentioned earlier, that there are a number of different ideas, particularly on the House end, as far as what we should or shouldn't be doing. And I think this proposal, again, I think it kind of finds a sweet spot there as far as providing tax relief, but in a fashion that even those that maybe have some concern, I think we're going to be able to build that support. But as I mentioned, we're going to start it on the Senate end, and once it passes out there, we're going to do our best on the House end, and I'm very optimistic we'll be able to get this done.
Is this separate from the internet sales tax and those $28 million worth of federal conformity that have been proposed?
Yeah, that's not a part of this bill.
Are you still pushing ahead with the internet sales tax bill separately, as well as the federal conformity?
The internet sales tax will be separate legislation that'll be introduced on that. That package, I understand, is still being worked out as to what that will comprise, but that certainly will be, but it's a separate issue. We want this 5.9 plan to stand on its own, and obviously everybody's got different concerns down the road, but this should be considered and presented on its own. Those other things will have to be dealt with separately.
So this bill will just include the income tax cut and not any other tax increases to pay for the cuts?
This will be a 5.9 plan that is nothing but a tax cut. All right, and let me back to one of
You're misunderstanding my question. My question is, how many taxpayers? I understand the net; they won't pay more, but how many taxpayers would have to pay higher rates? I don't think that's a very difficult question to answer.
No taxpayer will pay more in taxes
I get that.
under that.
I get that.
The question on the rate, I would like to have DF&A to break that down And I'd like to have them to be able to sit down with any of the media that's interested and sort of go through some of those very specific questions. And so we'll ask them to, if you could follow that with them.
We'd asked a series of questions like that over a period of about a month over the 2, 4, 5, 9 plan, so I didn't really get any.
Your question is how many would have a bracket increase, even though they would not have a tax increase? How many would have a bracket increase?
Higher rate, right.
Director Walther? Good. Thank you all very much. Hey. Great.